Maps of the Stars, which is the new film by David Cronenberg. I'm a huge David Cronenberg fan, as you know. And this is set in the sort of rancid cesspit of Hollywood. And it has an unbelievably sort of twisty narrative, which is inflected on the one hand by the sort of structure of Greek tragedy and on the other hand by kind of poisonous sitcoms. So the story is Mia Wasikowska, as we've now discovered that she's called. I was completely wrong before because I was saying Wasikowska, but it's Wasikowska. Is Agatha, who comes back to California having been away for enforced separation. She ends up working for Julianne Moore's fading actress, who is called Havana Seagrand, who looks like kind of Lindsay Lohan's wicked stepsister, who is this unbelievably sort of self-centered, shrieking, narcissistic nightmare, brilliantly portrayed.
We've all worked with people.
We've all worked with people, yeah. Brilliantly portrayed by Julianne Moore, who is being treated by Dr. Stafford Weiss, played by John Cusack, who is a kind of self-help, lifestyle, celebrity guru TV quack, who's somebody who sort of treats your psychological problems by addressing the physical body. So Agatha comes back, ends up working for Julianne Moore's character. Julianne Moore's character, Havana Seagrand, is desperate to land a role in a movie, which is a remake of a movie that her mother had made before her mother died in a fire. Her mother, meanwhile, is appearing to Havana as a taunting, ghostly figure, taunting her daughter for basically not being up to snuff and not being the great actress that she was. Meanwhile, Agatha has a strange relationship that relates to Dr. Stafford Weiss and a putative relationship with a limo driver played by Robert Pattinson.
Could you start again?
No, that's the whole point. Here's a clip.
I thought that Gary Marshall was going to be there, that it was a meet. I didn't know that I was going to have to read. And then they gave me the wrong drive on, and I had to walk like a mile, and I stank by the time I got there. And then the casting director, who I know doesn't even acknowledge me, she just walks right by without saying a word. And then she tells me that she doesn't even know if Gary knows that I'm coming in. Now, this is Gary Marshall, not Bertolucci. His movies don't make money anymore, and I know Gary. And then she says they want to put me on tape. And I'm like, excuse me, but you need special makeup for that, or you look green. And she says, well, you can either tape or not. Like it's all some pointless exercise. And I just can't take it anymore, Jacob. I'm so tired, and it's so pathetic.
You also have a sort of Bieber-esque young brat who's a teenager who's making millions in a television show, who is fresh out of rehab. You have the archetypal stage mom, and all these characters are connected together. You know, this is why I said about Greek tragedy. It's connected together in a weird sort of twisty kind of way in which all their paths are going to end up crashing in some sort of awful, tragic form. But the whole thing has the sheen of it, as I said, is a kind of poisonous sitcom. Now, the interesting thing about Maps of the Stars, which I like very much, is, firstly, Julianne Moore is terrific. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Julianne Moore anyway, but to play this kind of monstrous character is very, very difficult, because what you have to do is you have to make the character believable enough not to just be some caricature. But you also have to make her monstrous enough to make the film work, which is that somebody who is completely self-obsessed, completely narcissistic, who is genuinely quite horrifying. And Julianne Moore does it brilliantly. And, you know, I know what she said is that she's taken some sort of gestures and mannerisms from people that she knows, but it's a very, very organic portrait. And the thing that it reminded me of most of all was Samantha Eggar's kind of brooding character in the David Cronenberg movie The Brood. And in fact, there is a relationship between this and The Brood in the Stafford Weiss, the doctor who believes in the connection between the mind and the body. All that sort of psycho quack stuff that he's talking about is very, very similar to Psychoplasmics. And there's also a horror idea at the centre of it, because this is really on one level a sort of jet black comedy, but it's one of those comedies in which when you laugh, that's that nervous laughter that's almost like horror. You look at it with a sort of rictus grin. You don't know whether to smile or to shriek, and it's really smart the way it manages to do that balance, because it is, as much as any of Cronenberg's early body horror films, whether it's Shivers or Rabid or The Brood in this particular case. I mean, there's a famous story that Cronenberg said that The Brood was his Kramer versus Kramer, and this is kind of his Sunset Boulevard. And what usually happens when people set out to make films about the poisonous nature of Hollywood is that they quite often end up getting sort of just sucked in and seduced by the subject matter. And you look, for example, at Paul Schrader's The Canyons, which is just a perfect example of, you know, the film is as bad as all the things it's talking about. What's great about Cronenberg is that Cronenberg has this detached quality. I mean, people have talked about it in the past, about his movies in a kind of critical way, saying that the way in which he looked at the mutations and the viruses and everything in the early body horror films, they said there was something cold and dispassionate about it. Well, actually, I mean, I love those films anyway, but in the later part of his career, in which he's dedicated himself much more to psychological studies, so it's, you know, things like Dangerous Method and Crash and Cosmopolis recently, what he's done is he's got this detachment that he's used to look at this really, really poisonous cesspit-like milieu. But he never appears to be seduced by it. He never appears to be attracted by it. It doesn't ever look like, you know, he's really sort of fascinated in a kind of lurid way. He is literally, he's like a doctor or a scientist standing back looking at some poisonous thing and you know, addressing it with a scalpel, doing it in that very Cronenbergian way. Now, there's always been humour in Cronenberg's movies, but in the same way as, you know, sometimes if you laugh at something that's really horrible, it's because laughter and horror are very closely related. And this walks a very, very thin tightrope. Other performances are terrific as well. Mia Wasikowska does a very good job of doing this kind of ice-cool counterpoint to Julianne Moore's absolutely, you know, seething, outrageous character. I mean, I think Julianne Moore should win an Oscar for it. I think the chance of it happening is very little, but I think she absolutely should win an Oscar for it. And I was talking in a blog recently about when Jeremy Irons won his Oscar for Reversal of Fortune, and he thanked David Cronenberg from the stage. It wasn't David Cronenberg's film. He'd made Dead Ringers before, because people know that what Cronenberg does is to get the best out of his actors, and he's certainly done that with Mia Wasikowska, with Robert Pattinson, who's been terrific in the Cronenberg films he's been in. But the main joy of this for me is that Cosmopolis was very sterile. It was kind of suffocating. The silences were almost unbearable. And A Dangerous Method was very stagey. And I liked those films, but I admired them more than liked them. But in the case of this, it has the fleshiness, it has the meat on the bone, it has the visceral response that the best of Cronenberg's stuff do. So in a way, although it is very much a modern Cronenberg film, it's certainly Cronenberg's funniest film, which sounds like a peculiar thing to say about a Cronenberg film, but it is his funniest film, although all the laughter is dark and hollow.
So is it not laugh out loud then?
Well, I did laugh out loud on a couple of occasions, but the laughs are like, you know what I mean, when you're sort of laughing in shock. I mean, because some of the human behaviour on display is so repellent, in as much as it's just so, you know, there's a hole where their souls should be. And I think so, therefore, what it does is it paints this portrait of Hollywood. I mean, the script is by Bruce Wagner, who, of course, is a fine writer, and himself actually did serve time working as a chauffeur whilst writing the script. And what Cronenberg has done is taken that script and looked at it with a detached, a cool, a one removed eye, and then got his cast to do the very best they can. And it's one of the darkest, bleakest, and oddly funniest, but not in that way, kind of, movies of history. And Julianne Moore is just outstanding, and she should win an Oscar, but she won't.